A silverback gorilla weighs up to 200 kilograms. Most of that weight is muscle. It can bend steel bars with one arm and has never once in its life eaten a gram of meat. That fact alone should bother you a little. It bothered scientists for decades because everything we were taught about protein, that it comes from a carcass, that plants are a side dish, that real strength requires a steak, falls apart the moment you look closely at where the animal kingdom's biggest, most muscular creatures actually get their fuel. Today, we're going to look at 12 plants, some you've eaten 100 times without knowing what they were capable of. One of them is barely a plant at all. It's smaller than your fingernail, and it might be the single most efficient protein-producing organism on the planet. Stick with me to the end, because the last entry on this list isn't just interesting. It's being quietly tested right now as one of the answers to feeding a planet that's running out of farmland. Let's start counting down. Number 12. Green peas. Before peas were a thing children pushed to the edge of their plate, they were one of the reasons early agricultural societies survived their first hard winters. Archaeobotanists have traced cultivated peas back roughly 10,000 years to the hills of the Fertile Crescent, alongside wheat and barley, meaning peas are not a modern health food invention. They are one of humanity's founding crops. A single cooked cup delivers close to 9 grams of protein, and unlike most vegetables, that protein comes with a reasonably balanced amino acid spread. But the real trick peas perform happens underground, not on your plate. Like all legumes, peas host bacteria in their roots that pull nitrogen straight out of the air and lock it into the soil, meaning the very act of growing them makes the ground more fertile for the next crop planted there. Ancient farmers didn't understand nitrogen fixation. They just noticed that fields planted with legumes kept producing year after year when other fields wore out. They were watching biochemistry they had no name for. Number 11, black beans. Follow the trail of any great Mesoamerican civilization, Maya, Aztec, Olmec, and you will find black beans planted next to corn, climbing the same stalks. This wasn't decoration. Corn is missing an amino acid called lysine. Beans are loaded with it. Eaten together, the two plants complete each other's protein, which means the people who figured this out 3,000 years ago had independently solved a nutritional puzzle that food scientists wouldn't formally describe until the 20th century. One cooked cup delivers around 15 grams of protein and 15 grams of fiber, an unusually high ratio that feeds gut bacteria responsible for producing compounds linked to lower inflammation throughout the body. The preparation detail almost everyone skips. Soaking dried black beans for at least 8 hours before cooking doesn't just shorten cooking time. It breaks down compounds called oligosaccharides that would otherwise pass through your gut undigested, which is also, incidentally, why unsoaked beans have a reputation for causing digestive discomfort. The soak isn't optional. It's the difference between beans your body can actually use and beans that mostly just pass through. Number 10, pumpkin seeds. Long before pumpkin seeds were something you scraped out and threw away every October, indigenous farming systems across North America were drying and storing them deliberately as a dense winter protein and fat reserve, one part of the Three Sisters planting system alongside corn and beans. An ounce of pumpkin seeds, roughly a small handful, delivers about 9 grams of protein, which is more, gram for gram, than the same weight of ground beef. But the number worth remembering isn't protein, it's magnesium. Pumpkin seeds are among the most concentrated food sources of it on the planet, and magnesium happens to be required for over 300 separate chemical reactions in the human body, including nearly every step of turning dietary protein into usable muscle tissue. You can eat all the protein you want. Without enough magnesium, your body struggles to do anything with it. Researchers estimate a significant share of adults in industrialized countries are quietly deficient, and much of that deficiency traces back to soil depletion and processed diets, not the food itself being poor. Number 9. Chickpeas Excavations near Jericho have pushed the cultivation of chickpeas back roughly 10,000 years, making them one of the very first crops humans ever deliberately planted rather than simply gathered. They fed the builders of Mesopotamian cities, they crossed the Silk Road, and versions of hummus, mashed chickpeas with oil and seasoning, appear in cookbooks written in Cairo nearly 1,000 years ago. A cooked cup gives you roughly 15 grams of protein and 12 grams of fiber, but the detail worth sitting with is choline, a nutrient most people only associate with eggs. Choline is the raw material your body uses to build acetylcholine, the chemical messenger that fires the signal from nerve to muscle every time you move. You cannot have efficient muscle contraction without it. Soak dried chickpeas overnight, discard that water, and cook them fresh. The soak alone reduces compounds that block mineral absorption by a meaningful margin. It is a 2,000-year-old kitchen habit that modern food chemistry has simply confirmed was worth keeping. Number 8, hemp seeds. Hemp shows up in Chinese agricultural writing dating back over 4,000 years, and the nomadic horse cultures of the Central Asian steppe, the ones Herodotus wrote about with a mixture of fascination and alarm, carried hemp seed as portable trail food centuries before anyone had invented the energy bar. 3 tablespoons deliver roughly 10 grams of complete protein. All 9 essential amino acids, including 2 that are notoriously scarce in most plant foods. What makes hemp unusual is its fat profile, an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio close to 3:1, which nutrition researchers consider close to ideal for controlling the kind of low-grade inflammation that slows down muscle recovery after physical exertion. No soaking, no cooking, no prep, which is precisely why it disappeared from Western diets for decades for reasons that had nothing to do with nutrition and everything to do with its more famous cousin. The seed itself was never the problem. It was collateral damage in an unrelated argument. Number 7, edamame and whole soybeans. Soybeans have been cultivated in East Asia for at least 5,000 years, and across that stretch of history, people did something remarkably clever with them. They fermented them. Miso, tempeh, natto. Each one takes a plant protein and runs it through microorganisms that partially break it down before it ever reaches your mouth, making the amino acids inside dramatically easier to absorb. A cup of cooked edamame delivers around 17 grams of protein. Mature dried soybeans push closer to 28. It's one of the only plant foods that qualifies as a genuinely complete protein without needing to be paired with anything else, which is part of why soy-based diets have been studied so extensively by exercise physiologists. The fermentation detail matters more than the raw bean. Tempeh, made from whole fermented soybeans, retains the fiber that tofu loses in processing while adding a layer of naturally occurring probiotics. 2 products, same starting plant, very different outcomes. A reminder that how a protein is prepared can matter almost as much as what the protein is. Number 6, lentils. Lentils are, by a wide margin, one of the oldest crops on Earth. Remains have been found in archaeological sites in the Near East, dating back roughly 8,000 years, and they show up in the diets of ancient Egyptian laborers, Roman legions, and medieval European peasants alike for one simple reason. They cook fast, store for years, and pack an extraordinary protein punch for their size. 1 cooked cup delivers about 18 grams of protein, more than 3 eggs, roughly on par with a serving of chicken. What sets lentils apart from most legumes is their leucine content. Leucine is the specific amino acid that acts as a trigger, flipping the switch that tells your body to begin building new muscle tissue. It's also rich in iron, and pairing lentils with something high in vitamin C, a squeeze of lemon, a handful of chopped tomato, measurably increases how much of that iron your body actually absorbs. Simmer them gently rather than boiling hard, and stop the moment they're tender. Overcooked lentils turn to mush and lose the structural integrity that makes their protein more slowly and steadily digestible. Number 5, amaranth. Amaranth was not just food in the Aztec world, it was sacrament. Ground into flour, mixed with a binding agent, and shaped into figures for religious festivals, it sat at the center of both diet and ceremony. When Spanish colonial authorities moved to dismantle Aztec religious and agricultural practices, amaranth cultivation was one of the specific targets. Historical accounts describe active suppression of the crop precisely because of how central it was to the population's food supply and identity. It survived anyway, carried quietly through generations, and has only recently returned to wider cultivation. A cooked cup delivers roughly 9 grams of complete protein, notably rich in lysine, the amino acid that grains like wheat and rice are almost always short on. That single detail explains why grain-heavy diets throughout history tended to produce populations with lower average muscle mass than diets that combined grains with amaranth, legumes, or other lysine-rich plants. Rinse it before cooking to reduce naturally occurring compounds that interfere with mineral absorption, then simmer covered without lifting the lid. The result is a porridge-like texture with a nutty, slightly earthy flavor that works in both savory and sweet dishes. Number 4, spirulina. Two civilizations separated by an ocean with no contact whatsoever arrived at the exact same solution. The Aztecs harvested a blue-green algae from the surface of Lake Texcoco, pressed it into cakes called tequitlatl, and sold it in markets alongside corn. Thousands of kilometers away, the Kanembu people near Lake Chad in Central Africa were doing the same thing with the same organism, drying it into a food still eaten today called dihe. Neither culture had a microscope. Both had figured out, through pure trial and observation, that this particular pond scum kept people alive. That organism is spirulina, and by dry weight, it is somewhere between 60 and 70% protein. For comparison, beef sits around 26%. 2 tablespoons of the dried powder deliver roughly 8 grams of highly digestible protein alongside iron, B vitamins, and a blue-green pigment called phycocyanin that is currently the subject of active research into its antioxidant properties. It's also why space agencies, including NASA, have studied it as a candidate food for long-duration missions. When every gram of cargo counts, a food source that delivers this much protein per unit of weight is hard to ignore. Add it cold to juice or a smoothie, heat above about 60 degrees Celsius starts to break down the pigment that gives it much of its nutritional value. Number 3. Moringa. Across South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Southeast Asia, regions with essentially no historical contact with one another, the moringa tree earned the exact same nickname, translated into a dozen different languages. The tree that doesn't let you starve. It grows in poor soil, survives drought that kills most other crops, and can be harvested multiple times a year almost as soon as it's planted. Dried and ground into powder, its leaves contain close to 27 grams of complete protein per 100 grams, roughly double what you'd get from the same weight of yogurt, alongside calcium, potassium, and vitamin C in concentrations that dwarf the foods usually associated with those nutrients. This isn't folklore dressed up as science. International aid organizations have deployed moringa specifically in acute malnutrition programs because a single plant addressing multiple deficiencies at once is extraordinarily rare and extraordinarily useful in a crisis. Stir the powder into warm, not boiling, liquid, since high heat degrades its vitamin C content. A tree that can be harvested repeatedly survives where almost nothing else will and delivers this nutritional density is not a curiosity. It's closer to a piece of agricultural infrastructure. Number 2, quinoa. High in the Andes, above 3,000 meters, where the growing season is short and the air is thin, the Inca cultivated a crop they called the mother grain and treated with a reverence usually reserved for maize. It wasn't just food, it was planted first in each new agricultural cycle in a ceremony performed by the emperor himself. Quinoa is technically a seed, not a grain, and it is one of the only plant foods on Earth that qualifies as a complete protein entirely on its own. No pairing with beans or grains required. A cooked cup delivers about 8 grams of protein, along with a full amino acid profile that rivals foods twice its calorie density. It also carries a natural bitter coating called saponin, which the plant produces specifically to repel birds and insects, a defense mechanism that happens to double as a reason to rinse it thoroughly before cooking, or you'll taste every bit of that self-defense strategy in the final dish. It thrives in poor, salty, high-altitude soil where almost nothing else survives, which is exactly why agricultural researchers have spent the last 2 decades studying it as a candidate crop for regions where climate change is making traditional farmland harder to work. Number 1, duckweed. Here is where the story stops being about ancient civilizations and starts being about the next 100 years. Duckweed is the floating green film you've seen coating the surface of ponds your entire life and never once considered food. It is one of the smallest flowering plants known to science. Some species are barely a millimeter across, and it may also be one of the most efficient protein-producing organisms ever measured. Dried, certain species run between 35 and 45% protein by weight, a number that rivals soy and, in some varieties, edges past it. It has quietly been eaten for generations in parts of Southeast Asia, where a species called wolfia is harvested from rice paddies and cooked into everyday dishes, but almost nobody outside that region ever noticed. What makes duckweed genuinely remarkable isn't the protein percentage, it's the speed. Under good conditions, a duckweed colony can double its entire biomass in as little as 24 to 48 hours, faster than almost any land crop on the planet. It requires no soil, minimal land, and grows on water that would otherwise sit unused. Researchers studying future food security, including scientists connected to space agriculture programs, have flagged it as one of the most promising candidates for producing large amounts of complete usable protein from a fraction of the land and water that traditional livestock or even soy farming requires. Which brings us to the pattern sitting underneath this entire list. Every plant on this countdown has something in common that has nothing to do with protein grams. Each one has a fragile advantage that disappears if you don't know to protect it. Soak the beans or lose the nutrients to poor digestion. Rinse the quinoa or lose the flavor to bitterness. Keep the spirulina cold or lose the pigment that makes it valuable. Time the crucifers right or destroy the enzyme before it finishes its job. None of this is arbitrary tradition. It's applied chemistry that traditional cooks worked out through centuries of trial and error. Long before anyone could explain why it worked, and industrial food production, built for speed and shelf life rather than precision, has quietly dropped most of it along the way. The bigger question this leaves you with isn't really, which of these should I eat? It's this: how much of the value in the food you already buy has been lost somewhere between the field and your plate? Not because the plant failed you, but because the process did. If one of these surprised you, tell me which one in the comments. I read all of them. And if this changed how you think about where real protein comes from, share it with the person in your life who still thinks it only comes from a butcher's counter.